Welcome to another episode of Chatting with the Experts, TV show and podcast, where I speak with amazing women from Africa, from the Caribbean, and in the diaspora. These women are successful professionals and successful entrepreneurs, and they share my mission, which is to educate, empower, and encourage women globally. Today, we are going to be talking about when success becomes an addiction. And my guest, who will be joining me in a few minutes, says that as a psychologist and leadership coach specializing in introverted women in leadership, she has seen firsthand how work addiction, which she says is not just busyness, but it's a real behavioral addiction, disproportionately affects high achieving introverted women. She says her research and clinical work show that introverts are at a higher risk for workaholism, and especially when women are navigating corporate spaces, this can become a perfect storm. I'll tell you about her. She's a certified leadership coach, an organizational consultant, and a psychotherapist with over 25 years of experience helping introverted women rise to executive leadership. She blends psychology, business strategy, and real world experience to empower women to lead with confidence and impact. She's a Brooklyn native with proud Bajan, which means Barbadian roots, and is the founder of the Change Doc LLC, and she holds both a PhD in counseling psychology and an MBA from Cornell University. Please welcome to Chatting with the Experts, Dr. Nicole Bryan.
Hi, Paula. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to have this conversation with you today.
I am so excited as well because, speaking with you offline, we talked about how work addiction is real. It's not just a dedication, it's real. And so we're going to be touching on that today. You said you've done your research, so I'm not going to say why do you say so, but what has your research shown you about this?
So I think what is really interesting about work addiction and probably what sets it apart from other behavioral addictions. So there's other, behavioral addictions like sex addiction or game addiction, gambling addiction, like all of those are also real addictions. But I think what's unique about work addiction is that it's the one addiction that society actually embraces. Like we reward that addiction, unlike some of the others that I just mentioned. And because of that, it's a real conundrum for women in general who we have fought for our place in the workforce, right? Particularly in the United States, the Caribbean, in Africa, we don't realize how recent it has been that we as females are, have been a part of the paid workforce, I should say. We've always been a part of the workforce, but a part of the paid workforce. But with work addiction, some of that aspiration, some of our desire to be successful, some of our desire to prove ourselves has not only made us high achievers, but also led to some of us being addicted to work. And because of that addiction, and because we are now in the workforce, the paid workforce, we get rewarded all the time for being more addicted, right? For giving more time and energy and not being able to stop working. We get rewarded by the salaries that we receive, the bonuses that we receive, the job titles that we receive, the more accolades, the more certifications, the more education. All of those things kind of feed our desire, our internal drive to be even more successful. And we don't see that type of constant reward with other addictions like gambling addictions or sex addiction, etc. Right? We chase the high, but at every intersection, we get some type of prodding that helps us continue to do our work addiction behaviors versus having to stop. I personally dealt with work addiction myself. I think one of the things that people don't necessarily always understand is we will hear people say, oh, I'm a work addict or I'm a workaholic. That's usually what they say, I'm a workaholic. And it's bragging rights for them, right? And when people say that, they are usually meaning that they work long hours. They work long hours. So if your typical work hours in your country is 35 or 40 hours a week, someone who says they're a workaholic will be working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. But they say that without recognizing that working long hours is just working long hours. That's not necessarily the meaning that you are truly addicted to work. I realized that I was addicted to work probably in my late 30s. And I realized that I was addicted to work. Yes, I was working very long hours, but there are other indications of being a workaholic, right? Truly being addicted to work that people don't necessarily know. And so if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, hey, I wonder if I'm a workaholic, I would ask you to think about being compulsive about work, meaning that even when you want to stop working, you don't, right? So it means, yes, you are working long hours. You're probably working double what your job actually requires of you. Another indication or symptom could be that when you want to stop, you don't stop. Another indication could be that if you have relationships, your personal relationships outside of work are being damaged because you are working so much, meaning you're either not spending enough time with your partner, your children, your parents, etc. Or when you are spending time, when you're not working, technically not in the office or not actually on the clock for the job, you are still thinking about work. So you're physically not there, but your mind is still there. You're planning the next meeting. You're retelling a conversation that you had with a colleague the prior week. You are strategizing on how you're going to tackle a certain project, all while you're at the dinner table with your family or you're out shopping or something, right? All of these are potential symptoms of you being work addicted, not just working long hours. I, in my 30s, realized that even though I wanted to stop working, I couldn't, right? Meaning that even though I wanted to pull back on the number of hours that I was working, I just physically could not make myself do it. And it's really easy to tell the story that, oh, it's my company that, it's just this project that requires me to work. Once this project is over, I'll be back to, I'll cut back on my hours. Or maybe it's my boss that is requiring me to work so long, so hard all of the time. Or we tell ourselves it's the company culture. But when you move company cultures, or when you shift your boss, you have a new boss, or the project is over and your behavior is still the same, you have to eventually admit to yourself that it's not those environmental things, that the problem is with you. And that's what happened to me. And that's what led me to research work addiction and become an expert in it.
Interesting. But I'm going to come back to the same point again.
Sure, sure.
Why does research show that introverted women are more vulnerable to this?
It's because of the way introverts operate in the world, right? So being an introvert is a personality trait. And we can argue whether personality traits are learned or innate or whatever. I think it's a combination of both. But the way introverts work in the world are some traditional characteristics of introverts is that we get our energy internally, right? So, and we don't get it externally. We rejuvenate ourselves from having time alone, right? That's one
Mhm.
characteristic. Another characteristic of introverts is that we think a lot. We're overthinkers. We reflect a lot. And that usually happens when we spend time by ourselves. And so I think that the correlation between someone being an introvert and them being more susceptible to becoming work addicted is because we as introverts spend a lot of time in our heads. And when we spend a lot of time in our heads, that gives us more room to ruminate over something. And when we ruminate, one thing that we will attach ourselves to is our work as part of our identity. And so all of those factors, I think, is what makes introverted women more susceptible than most other people to becoming work addicted.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of time is spent in your head. One likes being by oneself, and therefore, work becomes your identity. And so spending time thinking about work even boosts your own identity. You can justify it and you can see the reason why you're constantly working, even though, as
Yes.
you said, you could be at the dinner table, but your mind is on the next project or what somebody said to you at work or how you can improve something you know, that you were thinking about.
Yes.
But it makes me think about my dad. My dad was an engineer. He loved engineering. So wherever we went, and we laugh about it, we'd always be looking at structures and beams you
Yes.
know. And now I'm thinking about it. Maybe he was an introvert. Now these are in the 70s where, we weren't too much into personality types, etc.
Yeah.
But now,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is that all of us as individuals, we each, no matter what you claim in terms of introvert or extrovert, or, if you've taken assessments, a lot of there's personality tests that you can take
Mhm,
that help you
mhm,
determine whether you are introvert or extrovert, no matter what that is, or what the results of those things are, all of us have both introvert and extrovert traits. Right,
mhm.
that's proven, that's not really up for debate. And what brings out those different traits is the situations that we're in. So, for example, there are a lot of introverts who, with their families, they may show up extroverted because
Mhm,
they're comfortable with their family, right? The role
mhm.
that they have in that family system and family dynamic, it may seem like they're extroverts with their families, but when they go out into the rest of the world, their introverted traits come out. So sometimes it is situational, right? But the truth of the matter is, we all have both introvert and extrovert qualities and traits within us.
You're right, because I know it was from the millennials I kept hearing about, what's it, ambivert. I'm an introvert
Yes.
extrovert. And I'm like, what on earth is that? You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yes, yes, yeah. Ambivert are those who will not necessarily claim introvert or extrovert, but readily admit that they can go back and forth. They will demonstrate introvert traits in some situations, extrovert traits in other situations. I will say that from a clinical psychology and clinical standpoint, there is no ambivert. You're primarily an introvert or you're primarily an extrovert. However, nomenclature in terms of, pop culture, the
Hmm.
ambivert piece comes up. And I
Hmm.
think that is because there are so many people who now recognize that they may demonstrate either of those types of qualities depending on the situation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nomenclature is determined by, as you say, culture, pop culture,
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
yeah,
so right. You're so
yeah.
right. So what are some of the warning signs that we can look for?
So I think I mentioned a few already, but here's what I will say. And frankly, I will say that for anyone listening, don't try to self-diagnose yourself, right? So if you really do believe that you are a workaholic or a work addict, if you have an addiction to work, it's a serious compulsion, right? So, and it can have detrimental impacts, detrimental effects. It can have effects on your personal health. It can have impacts on how you work, so your work environment. It can have impacts on your family. There are some workaholics who will go broke, go bankrupt, right? There are some workaholics who literally lose their relationships, lose their family. So this is not something that is, a nice to talk about. It's a real, true issue that if you believe that you are a workaholic or a work addict, that I would implore you to actually seek someone out to get help. With that said, there are some indicators, right, or symptoms that you can, or warning signs. Let's call them warning signs. Like, think of them in terms of warning signs. If you have one or more of these things, I would want you to ask yourself, am I work addicted? Like, I would want you to be reflective about that. And then I would also ask you to, if you're unsure, ask your colleagues, ask people who see you and know you, ask your family, your spouse, etc. So one is, and I think I mentioned this already, it's a compulsion, right? So you can't stop even when you want to. So even when your body is screaming for rest, even when your mind is, when you're working really late and you are like, the words start to blur and you feel like you're reading the same thing over and over and over again, but you keep pushing yourself to read it, even though you know it's not making sense anymore to you.
Mm-hmm.
But compulsion is kind of like that. Like, you should stop working. It's time to cut the computer off, to stop thinking about the project, etc. Even though you want to, you cannot. That is the compulsivity. Like, you're no longer in control of your behaviors, right? Your mind is telling you one thing, but you're pushing your body to keep doing something else. So if you find yourself compulsively working, that is a warning sign that you might be addicted to work. The other one that I talked about earlier is when your relationships erode, right? So your personal life is literally falling apart because work comes first, right? I will tell you the story of, when I was in my late 20s and I was addicted to work, but wasn't aware that I was addicted to work yet, right? I thought I was just climbing the corporate ladder and I was doing everything I needed to do to kind of create a name for myself, to build financial security for myself, and all of those things. And at the time, I was readily dating, right? I wasn't necessarily dating for marriage, but I had a relationship that was really important to me. And this person was very clear about his needs in terms of time and intentionality. And I heard him and I recognized that, yes, I want this relationship, but I could not pull myself away long enough or often enough from work to be able to give the time and energy to this relationship that I wanted, right? So that relationship eroded, right? That person was very clear in what their needs were. I heard them. I was like, yes, I'm going to do it. And then I would not do it. And then it happened again and it happened again. So when your relationships erode, and again, it's not just your personal relationships. Many of the women that I work with who are work addicted, it's not always their spouse who is the relationship that erodes. It sometimes can be their parents. It's oftentimes their children, it's their sisters, their siblings, etc. Right? So not just, don't only think about it in terms of a romantic partner. So if your
Mm-hmm.
relationships erode, that's another warning sign. If you have mental occupation, so meaning like even when you're not working or when you're off the clock, you're mentally working, you're planning, you're playing conversations, you're trying to solve business problems when technically you're at the pool or you're on the beach or you're doing something else. You're spending time, quality time with your friends and your family at the picnic, but you're really sitting there and working, right? So if you're mentally preoccupied. Another warning sign is emotional regulation, right? You need work to feel okay. You need to be working to feel okay for yourself. Without it, you feel really anxious, or you feel worthless, or you feel lost, right? That's another key warning sign. The other, we kind of alluded to it earlier, Paula, is you have no other identity. So even despite the fact that you are a mom, you're a wife, you belong to the church, all of these other aspects of your identity, when someone asks you what you do for fun, you draw a blank because work is your identity, right? You prioritize that above all other things and to the detriment of all other things. So, yeah, those are some of the warning signs that if you are experiencing these things, and not just as a one off, right? Not just for 1 month or the 3 month project. If these things are an ongoing experience that you are having, that's when you need to be asking yourself whether or not you might be addicted to work.
Thanks for expanding on this because, yes, we touched on it earlier, but now that you've really expanded, woo, when fun and work are the same thing for you. I mean, that's what jumped out at me in particular, because I know a few people like that. You ask
Yeah,
them, what do you do for fun? Fun? Why should I have fun? They
yeah,
don't even
yeah.
think about going on vacations. To them, that's a waste of time when I could
Right.
be doing XYZ or making this amount of money by working, etc.
Yeah.
You see that identity,
And
the
I,
work becomes their
yeah,
identity. So, well, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, and if with that in particular, I think it's important to distinguish, yes, for we all dream of having a job or having a career where we have fun, right? That we enjoy what we do. So that's not what we're talking about. If you, and Paula, I know you enjoy what you do. I enjoy what I do for a living. So if you enjoy what you do for a living, that is great. That is what we want. That's the goal. It's when you not only enjoy it or you equate that with fun, but you can't stop it, right? It's when you are doing it, but you can't turn it off. It's when other people see you and they're like, I want to spend time with you, but you're so busy having fun doing your work that you're neglecting me. You're neglecting the things that you say are important to you. That's when it becomes problematic. Not that you enjoy your work. We want you to enjoy your work. We all
Yeah.
want to do that. But when that is prioritized to the detriment of every other aspect of your existence, that's when it's a problem.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that clearly
Yeah,
because I can think of some people I know that describes 100%.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure we all know work, and that's part of the issue, right? In my opinion, as a person who studies this, researches this, and works with people who are workaholics, we all, if once I describe this, people are like, oh, I can see this person. They start naming people. Oh,
Mhm.
Sally and Sarah and Jack. They name the people who they know meet these criteria. But because it is held up as such a good thing to be so high achieving, to be successful, because we're rewarded for the behaviors, then that's why I think this goes so undiagnosed.
Got you. Got you. Wow. I'm just, as you said, I'm thinking of so many people I could put a check mark against their name,
Yeah, yeah.
with the description. Mm.
And I think for those of us who, I think particularly introverted women in particular have, I think that about the historical context, right? And before we even entered the paid workforce, right, we were able to go into companies and organizations and work and get paid for our work. We were the center, and we still are the center of our homes. And we worked in the homes, right? Raising our
Mhm.
children, taking care of the household, etc. And even then, when we weren't necessarily getting paid for our work, we were constantly working around the clock. You'd never turn off being a mother or a wife or taking care of a home and taking care of your elderly parents, your grandbaby. So many of us have multiple generations that we are responsible for as
Mhm.
caregivers. We never turn that off. So I also believe that there's the historical perspective, plays into the fact that we are more susceptible to becoming workaholics. Yeah, and I do think our desire to achieve, right, to prove to the world, so many of us have the desire to prove to the world that we can do all things. We can be all things to all people, including, becoming vice presidents and executive vice presidents, including making multiple six figures in terms of our income, doing all of that while doing everything else. I think that also makes us more susceptible to becoming addicted to work as well.
Yeah. Before we round up here, before we close out,
Sure.
any suggestions on how we can help ourselves? There may not be solutions, but there could be like, tips on how to recognize it and then how to start making steps of putting things in place. You see it in
Yeah.
yourself or you see it in a loved one on what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, let me say that let me talk about recognizing it first, and then I'll talk about
Mhm.
solutions. So, we talked about the symptoms. We talked about, right, not self-diagnosing, but if you recognize some of these behaviors in yourself,
Mhm.
it is
Mhm.
important to ask the question, am I work addicted? Even if you think there is a possibility, maybe you don't know, but if you think there's a possibility, I personally would recommend that you ask someone who knows you really well, right?
I
Your
did say
best
that.
friend. And that's one thing I love about women. Our friends, they will be honest
Tell you.
with us. They're going to tell us. They're not going to let us walk around like we crazy. So you ask your best friend, ask your partner, right? Ask someone who really knows you well, and share with them what we talked about today in terms of potential symptoms, and ask them if they see that in you. That's just a good check and balance that you don't have to go anywhere. That's a phone call or a quick conversation, right? To get validation or invalidation of what you might be already thinking.
Okay.
When you get to a point where you're like, you know what, I probably do have an issue, you can by trying to self-regulate, meaning you can start if your problem is you're working way too many hours, you're working double the hours that your company requires, then you can start by trying to cut back those hours, right? Like suggest that you start with the behaviors that you see that you're overextending yourself on. You can try that. Meaning, and I did this as well, I tried to cut back on the actual physical hours that I was working. I tried to stop myself when I would be at the dinner table or out to dinner with friends and family, and my mind would start going toward work. Like I would literally try to correct myself and bring myself back into the conversation. So there are those things that you can try to do. I will say though that if you truly are addicted to work, when you try those things, it's not going to work, right? If you're addicted, right? So trying to on your own correct those behaviors, it's either not going to work at all or it's going to work for a very short time. And then you're going to find yourself going right back into the problematic behaviors that you had before. And that is when you truly do know that you are addicted and you need to get some other type of help, either through a psychologist or psychotherapist or even a clinical social worker, right? Work addiction is a compulsion. So the person that you go to for help doesn't have to be an expert in work addiction, but they do have to be an expert in helping with behavioral addictions. So that's one way you can get professional help if you need it. The other way is there are Workaholic Anonymous. So just like there are Alcoholic Anonymous, there are organizations that are dedicated to Workaholic Anonymous. So there are group programs that would help you to deal with the addiction that you have with work. So that's another avenue that you could go to for professional support.
I love it. I love it because sometimes people think that, well, there's no hope. Knowing
Yeah.
that there's hope
Yes.
is, the beginning many times of getting help.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Yes.
thank you. And
Yeah.
so, if someone wants to get in touch with you, Dr. Nicole, how can they
Yes.
how can they get in touch with you online?
So online, you can go to my website, which is www.thechangedoc.com, which I'm sure we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah.
So you can go to my website, which you'll learn more about me, my services, etc. I'm also primarily on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and search The Change Doc or Dr. Nicole Bryan, I will pop up. So either of those ways is good. I
Okay.
also have a podcast that I'm a podcast. I love podcasts. Like I over consume podcasts. But if you are into podcasts, I also have a podcast and it's called Leading Her Introvert Way. So that's another way that's on all the podcast platforms.
The podcast. I've been a podcaster for 13 years, so I'm all in.
You got me beat. I am still very new. This is year 3,
Oh,
but I've been an avid listener to podcasts for a very long time. And absolutely, it's one of my favorite ways to learn. So
it
I'm
is.
grateful.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Wow. And for those of you who joined us, you'll have an opportunity to speak with her and ask her whatever questions that you may have that I didn't ask. And for those listening and viewing this online, if you'd like to be a guest like Dr. Nicole Bryan, reach out to me on my website, which is chattingwiththeexperts.com. I am also on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I'm not paid to say that, but I do love LinkedIn. And just search for Paula Okone there. On Instagram, I have an Instagram handle, which is at chat_experts_podcast. I'm also on Facebook. I'm more so now than I used to be in the past. Look for my business page there or my personal page, Paula Okone. You can reach out to me there. And we now have a YouTube channel that I love for you to
Very nice.
subscribe to. Yes, yes, yes. And thank you again, Dr. Nicole. And now, for those in the audience, we'll open up the floor so that you can ask her questions and find out, so much more about this very interesting topic when success becomes an addiction and why introverted women are most affected by that. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.